Sukkot and the road to maturity. Sukkot and the road to maturity. Father, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. May they bring you pleasure. May you be pleased with what we consider and what we resolve at this time. It's a Drash based on Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, which is read at this time because Ecclesiastes really talks about the frailty of life, that the things that people depend upon in life are not so dependable after all. Just a second, we're blocked a little bit here. Hold on a moment, and we'll continue. Thank you very much.
It's fine on the screen.
Yes, it's fine, but it wasn't on mine. It's on mine now. Thank you very much, Rusty. In Passover, we're freed from slavery, but our sages remind us that being freed from slavery was not enough because we were not really free until we received God's Torah, because everybody serves something. As Bob Dylan said, it might be the devil or it might be the Lord, but you got to serve somebody. And although we were out of slavery when we left Egypt, we were not free until we received the Torah to give us a way of life to live in. Freedom's event was the Exodus. Yom Kippur, you could say, gives us freedom's means from an atonement point of view, because we're free from the guilt of sin through the atonement that God provides. But Sukkot acknowledges freedom's struggle towards maturity. It's not enough that Israel was out of Egypt. It's not even enough that they came to Sinai. We still had 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And that's kind of like our lives. We're delivered from sin through the atonement of Yeshua. We receive God's guidance in the scripture, but we still have to struggle in life. It's one thing to have freedom's event, another thing to have freedom's means, but it's another thing to really have maturity and freedom. So we're going to talk about Sukkot and what it has to say about the struggle of life, the struggle towards maturity. Why did God set us free? It was not to go and play. Israel was not set free. God didn't just say, got them through the Red Sea. He said, now go ahead, children, go play. He says, no. He says, let my people go that they may serve me in the wilderness. We were set free to live with him and to live for him. We were set free for righteous and mature living, and that's not easy. What is maturity? True maturity means learning to appreciate the everyday struggles along the way. We're still, the book of Hebrews says, there remaineth therefore a rest for the people of God. We've entered into a rest in a way, but we're still struggling towards that rest. We're struggling towards that final Shabbat. We're struggling towards that final promised land. True maturity means learning to appreciate the everyday struggles along the way, to acknowledge them, not to resent them, and to just deal with them. We're going to find 4 principles from Kohelet that help us with that struggle. The first maturity principle is that life will seem unfair. I want to say that again because it's so true and it's not often articulated. Life will seem unfair. There have been times for some of you, at least one of you, that you've groused under the awareness that life seems unfair. But to mature in the year ahead, we need to remember that life is a puzzle only God can solve. It will seem unfair, but figuring out that unfairness, it'll only drive you crazy. The book of Job is all about this. Job is a totally innocent man, pure, blameless, innocent, godly, and then all hell breaks loose. He loses his health, he loses his wealth, He loses his children. His wife says to him, look, why don't you complete the job? Why don't you just curse God and die? You got nothing to live for, man, nothing to live for. And he has three religious friends who come to him and who are telling him, look, it's really very simple, Job. When you were a righteous man, everything was coming up roses. You got rich, your children got well, got healthy, got rich themselves. Your life was perfect. Now your life is going to hell in a handbasket. It's obvious what's wrong. You've sinned. Now, they were all giving respectable religious answers, but they were absolutely wrong. Because life is a puzzle that only God can solve. They thought they had the solution, but they didn't. And Job insisted, no, I will not admit that I have sinned. I have not sinned. Job was right. He had not sinned. But at the end of the book, God says to him, I know you didn't understand what was going on. And frankly, if I had explained it to you, you wouldn't have understood either, because it's way beyond your competence. And the whole message of the book of Job, from my point of view, is this: do you trust me? When everything is going bad, when nothing seems fair, when nothing is fair, do you trust me? That's the question of the book of Job. In the book of Ecclesiastes, this principle is explored a number of times. I'm going to show you a few texts. And by the way, there are more than 4 principles in Ecclesiastes. I've limited myself, and there's more texts than these. I encourage you to read Ecclesiastes. It's an extremely modern book. And here's some of the texts that support that idea that life is a puzzle only God can solve. Pat, Livy Andrews, would you read this text, please?
Sure. I turned away and thought about all the kinds of oppression being done under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. The power was on the side of their oppressors, and they had no one to comfort them.
Is that fair? No, it's not fair. The good guys, the poor guys, the people who need help are being oppressed, and the rich people who are immoral are getting richer and richer. As we used to say when I was a kid, the rich get rich and the poor get poorer. Is that fair? No, it's not. Rusty, read this one.
The situation in which a solitary individual, without a companion, with neither son nor brother, keeps on working endlessly but never has enough wealth. For whom, he should ask, am I working so hard and denying myself pleasure? This is truly pointless, a sorry business.
Right. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. One translation says soap bubbles, all is soap bubbles. It's point, and here this translation refers to it as being pointless. It makes no sense. Why bother living at all when all the labor that you subject yourself to is futile? You're going to leave it to somebody else who's a skunk. Naomi, would you read this one?
Didn't we just do number 1? Life is a puzzle only God can solve.
We did that. This is this is the 4th.
Well,
But
I
it's
don't have that on the screen.
Yeah. This is principle number 1, not text number 1. This is
Okay.
principle number 1.
All right, then it's there. When I applied myself to gain wisdom and to observe how people occupy themselves on earth, that people's eyes don't see sleep either by day or by night, then on looking over all of God's work, I realized that it is impossible to grasp all the activity taking place under the sun, because even if a person works hard at searching it out, he won't grasp it. And even if a wise person thinks he knows it, he still won't be able to grasp it.
Life is a puzzle that only God can solve. Only He can understand it. That's the first principle that we need to keep in mind if we're going to progress towards maturity. If we fight against that, it's not going to do any good. We need to accept the fact that there are some things only God knows. and we need to get on with it. Here's the second maturity principle. Michael, would you read this principle, please?
To mature in the year ahead, avoid being seduced by the believable but empty propositions and pleasures of a world estranged from God.
Now, this book is presents itself as being written by King Solomon. King Solomon had it all. He had everything that people spend their lives trying to accumulate. He had money, he had sex, and he had power. He had the big three. But in this book, he gives us the benefit of his experience where he says, none of this ultimately satisfied me. I had it all. Don't be seduced by the believable but empty propositions and pleasures of a world estranged from God. You can spend your whole life getting it and you realize you have nothing. Years ago when I traveled with the Liberated Wailing Wall, we met a lady in Chicago named Ginny. I don't remember her last name, but it may very well come back to me. And she did Bible studies with women on Lake Shore Drive, which was the ritzy schmitzy area in the Chicagoland area. And these were women whose households were very, very wealthy. They had everything that everybody else spends their lives trying to get, thinking it'll make them happy. These women had it, and they were the most miserable people she knew because they had everything that everybody wants, and they knew they weren't happy, and there was nowhere to go. They needed this second maturity principle. First, that life is a puzzle that only God can solve, and secondly, don't spend your life accumulating the pleasures and empty propositions of a world estranged from God. And here's some of the texts in the book that make this point. Richard, would you read this one?
Avoid being seduced by empty pleasures. For what does a person get from all his efforts and ambitions permeating the work he does under the sun? His whole life is one of pain. His work is full of stress. Even at night, his mind gets no rest. This too is pointless. So there is nothing better for a man to do than to eat and drink, let himself enjoy the good that results from work. I also realize that this is from God's hand.
He said, if you're really smart, you won't despise the simple pleasures of life. If you're going for the gusto, if you're going for the gold ring, if you're going to make the big score, you're a dope. Because it's not going to satisfy you. That's what he's saying. Be satisfied with the simple pleasures of life that God gives us. Good food, good friends, good work. If you have that, you're a wealthy man. But avoid being seduced by empty pleasures. Here's another text. Ruth Chan, would you read this one? I guess we don't have Ruth there, or
Right here.
okay.
For who will eat and who will enjoy except me? For to the man who is good from God's viewpoint, he gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy. But to the sinner, he gives the task of collecting and accumulating things to leave to him who is good from God's viewpoint. This too is pointless and feeding on wind.
In other words, the assumption here is that the wicked person is the avaricious person, the greedy person, the person who wants it all. But the fact of it is you can't take it with you. And ultimately, someone else will get it. And sometimes it'll be the righteous who get it, although I haven't seen that very often. The third principle, and there are four that I've gone through. The first one was realize that life is a puzzle only God can solve. The second one is that don't waste your life going after the pointless pleasures and propositions of a world estranged from God. Here's the third one. To mature in the year ahead, we must learn to enjoy the basic pleasures of life. We touched on that just recently. Always seeing them as blessings from our Creator, the simple blessings of life. Paul says, therefore, having food and raiment, therefore therewith we will be content. If we just have clothes to wear and food to eat and clothes to wear, we're cool. Yeshua also says, consider the lilies, they neither toil nor spin, and yet they're clothed better than anyone else. He says, why do you spend all your time being anxious for all these things? Seek the kingdom of God, and God will take care of these things for you. He'll provide your basic necessities. But don't become obsessed with other things. To mature in the year ahead, learn to enjoy the basic pleasures of life, always seeing them as blessings from the Creator, and don't be greedy. Here's a few texts that that support that. Rusty, I can't see people's names up here. Just a minute, maybe I can do it this way. Yes, I can. Okay, Larry Little, would you read this number 3, please?
Okay. That everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God.
Well, read that again. That's basic to this book. Read it again.
That everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God.
Right. I remember when I was first a believer, and this just came to mind. When I was first a believer, a woman named Frances McClammer took an interest in my spiritual well-being. I was a believer about 5 weeks. I was 19 years old. And I went to a meeting at a place called the Bible Christian Union. That's what it was called, in Brooklyn. It was an outreach to Jewish people. And sitting next to me was the mother of a Jewish believer I knew. And here I am, I'm 19 years old. This woman at this time is probably late 40s. And she says to me, she turns to me, a relative stranger, and she says, you know, I wish I was rich. My husband gambles, he's a bum. I wish I was rich. And I knew at that time, her name was Shapiro. I knew at that time that Mrs. Shapiro, if she had $1 million, what would be coming out of her mouth was, I wish I had $2 million. Because she was obsessed with what she didn't have. And people who are obsessed with getting what they don't have, beyond the basic necessities of life, can never be happy. The prophet Dennis Prager says that gratitude is the foundation of happiness, and that is true. And that's what Ecclesiastes is saying. Be grateful for the basic necessities you have, and you will be happy. If you're ungrateful, if you're like Mrs. Shapiro, you'll never be happy. That everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil or her toil. This is the gift of God. Here's another text demonstrating that we should gratefully enjoy God-given pleasures. Johnny, I'm going to ask you to read this one. If you can unmute yourself.
Okay. Gratefully enjoy God's given pleasures. Two are better than one, and that there's a cooperative efforts yield this advantage. If one of them falls, the other will help his partner up. Woe to him who is alone when he falls and has no one to help him up. Again, if two people sleep together, they keep each other warm. But how can one person be warm by himself? Moreover, an attacker may defeat someone who is alone, but two can resist him. And a 3-strand cord is not easily broken.
Okay, the whole point of this is the tremendous power of social relationship, of intimate social relationship. They've been doing studies, sociological studies of aged people. Why do some people live longer than others? And one of the denominators that they point out, they did this study, by the way, Japan is the place with the most supercentenarians in the world, the people who are well over 100 years old. Japan is the place, especially Okinawa. And why is that? It's not only because of diet, but it's because the people in that culture are very socially connected. They're not forgotten. They're not left in old age homes, in facilities where their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren visit them once a year. They're socially connected. And one of the things that will bring satisfaction in life and maturity in life is having friendships, close friendships, intimate friendships. Two are better than one. If one of them falls, the other one will help his partner up. But woe to the person who's alone when he falls and has no one to help him up. It's sad. It's unspeakably sad that there are people who lead lives of quiet desperation. Nobody seems to care. So if you want to have a life that moves towards its goal, that's worth living, make sure you have relationships. You won't have a lot of them, but make sure you have close relationships that are mutually cultivated. Here is the fourth principle. To mature in the year ahead, remember that satisfaction is only found by those who revere and obey God. I'll say it again. The person who really has a satisfying life is a person who respects and obeys God as he or she understands God to be. A person who lives this kind of life of accountability. The book ends this way and states this principle. Here is the final conclusion. Now that you have heard everything, fear God and keep his mitzvot. This is what being human is all about. Other translation says, this is the whole duty of man or of people. And the Hebrew says, Zot Torat Adam. This is the Torah of humanity. This is guidance for all humanity. Here is the final conclusion. Now that you have heard everything, fear God, reverence God, and keep his mitzvot. This is what being human is all about. For God will bring to judgment everything we do, including every secret, whether good or bad. There is guidance for a life. There's guidance. Now, many people will not have anything to do with this. Instead, they're going to say, get out of my way. I got an appointment this week. I'm going to make a big bundle of money. And they accumulate a lot of money. But it doesn't give lasting satisfaction. Let's see, before we go, let's see what the Apostle Paul says about this and what Robert Frost says about this. This is great wisdom. Here's the Apostle Paul. And Laurie, I'll ask you to read this, Philippians 3:15, and read the next one too.
Okay. Let those of us who are mature think this way, and if in anything you think otherwise, God will reveal that also to you.
And I would say that about this study from Ecclesiastes. If we are mature, we will accept stuff like this. And God works on us that we might come to such opinions. Paul uses the concept of maturity also when talking to the Colossians. Laurie, read this, please.
Colossians 1:28. Him we proclaim, warning everyone and teaching everyone with all wisdom, that we may present everyone mature in Messiah.
Now, that's what is maturity ultimately? Maturity is developing our full potential. And our potential is that we're created in the image of God. And through Yeshua, God wants to restore that image in us. And through the power of the Holy Spirit, he wants to perfect that image. So what is maturity? Maturity is becoming like Yeshua. Becoming, no one was ever more fully human than Yeshua was. And if we want to be mature, fully human, then that's our goal, to become like him. Okay, now this is a famous poem. Now let's see who I'm going to bother to read this. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to ask Debbie to read this. Debbie, there's 4 panels for this poem. It's a very familiar poem. It's and I gotta back it up just a moment. Are you gonna back up for me, baby? Yes, you are. It's often called The Road Not Taken, but it's also got a line in it that is what I tend to call it, which is the road less traveled. So just a second, I'm going to clear off something on my screen so I can see it. Okay, would you please read this, Deborah?
2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth.
So you see this picture, there's a road and then there's a divergent, 2 roads diverge there. And he's making a choice between which road he's going to travel.
Then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned him really about the same.
Right, so he picked one. He took one that had a better claim. It was grassier. It had not been used as much, so he took that one. Well, just a second. Here's the third.
And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back.
Right. He left the other road. I'll come back to that sometime, but I'm going to take this one. I'm going to take this one that other people have not taken so much. And he said, but knowing that how way leads on to way, I figured, well, I probably wouldn't come back to the other road. But he made his choice, the road that was less worn. Go ahead, read the last one.
I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
Right. What does it mean for us? It means that what Yeshua said. He says, enter the straight gate, for the wide is the way that leads to destruction, and many there are that find it. But the road that leads to life is the narrow way. It's the road less traveled. The road to maturity is the road less traveled. It's the one that a lot of people don't choose. They succumb to the enticements of the world. They succumb to what's glitzy, what's appealing. They succumb to a never-ending quest for more money, more sex, and more power. But if we're wise, as Frost was wise in this magnificent poem, he said, I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. If we will take the road of maturity that God lays out before us, that will make all the difference. May God give us wisdom. May He give us insight. May He give us satisfaction in the basic satisfactions of life: food, raiment, friends, work. And let's not waste our lives being greedy for more. May you have a good year.